Let's check on the situation in the Middle East to start with this morning. Israel will retaliate after Iran's large-scale ballistic missile attack. That reprisal could come at any time, but probably tomorrow on the anniversary of the 7 October attack by Hamas last year. Geoffrey Miller is an international geopolitical analyst with the Democracy Project, an initiative hosted by Victoria University. He's working on a PhD at the University of Otago on New Zealand's relations with the Gulf states, and he's lived and worked across the Middle East. Morena, Geoffrey, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Jim.
How will Israel retaliate? I mean, they'll possibly be persuaded out of attacking Iran's nuclear program or not. That's not certain either.
Look, the signs are quite ominous. The response could come at any time and in any form. I think all the options are on the table. Even strikes against nuclear sites I don't think are out of the question. Israel has reportedly refused to give any guarantees to the United States that it will not attack the nuclear sites. Oil facilities could well be a target. Oil production, refining, distribution facilities, those are softer targets. Some of them are located by the coast. That would be easier for Israel to target. And oil prices went up just by 5% just when Joe Biden suggested that was being discussed last week. So I think all options are on the table. It is quite a dangerous moment now. The response really could come, as I say, at any time now that the Sabbath has ended in Israel. Jewish New Year is over, and we just need to wait and see, I guess, what happens. It's quite terrifying.
It is scary. Just as there are hardliners in Iran, there are those voices in Israel who see a chance to reshape the Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu was talking about his vision for Jews and Persians living in harmony. But what would that look like? In the Haaretz newspaper, where is Israel heading when the only horizon its leaders offer is war? It's a good question, Geoffrey.
Certainly is. I think Benjamin Netanyahu dreams of regime change in Iran. He gave a speech or made a video message directed at the Iranian people last week. And he said, the moment of freedom for Iranians could come sooner than we think. And I think in many ways that's kind of the dream, as I say, for Netanyahu and many of his ilk in Israel. Failing that, the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program would be a good place to start. I mean, that's something that Netanyahu has campaigned against for years, the Iranian nuclear program. And now there's suddenly an opportunity with Hamas at its knees, with Hezbollah being heavily degraded. And now perhaps there is an opportunity, and Benjamin Netanyahu is a master at turning a crisis into an opportunity, as he has over the past year. He's an incredible survivor, whatever you think of him. And we never would have thought a year ago after those attacks that Benjamin Netanyahu would still be standing politically after all this time, and yet he is. And I think this is a moment that he will be trying to use. And there is a lot of support in Israel for a hardline strategy. There was some interesting polling that came out last week in Israel. Even before those 180 ballistic missiles struck Israel from Iran, 68% of Israelis, according to this polling, supported an Israeli strike on Iran. 66% are against a two-state solution, according to this polling. And 80% agree with the strategy of going into Lebanon, taking the fight to Hezbollah, even while the war in Gaza is still raging. So there is a very hardline strand, I guess, amongst the Israeli population at the moment, or hardline stance. And there is an appetite for quite a large-scale response, and a desire to take a strategy similar to that what has been seen against Hamas and Hezbollah to Iran directly. And that's what's, I guess, so frightening, because that will lead to retaliation from the Iranian side. Iran has promised that, particularly if the oil facilities or nuclear facilities are targeted. So the cycle of violence will go on, and escalation will continue.
That much discussed two-state solution, with Lebanon at the UN saying the member countries of the Muslim Arab Committee could guarantee Israel's security. That two-state solution's been on the books for decades, hasn't it? And its doubters suggest it would result in carnage. foreignpolicy.com, I notice, is suggesting it's the corpse of a solution you revive when you have no other idea about what to do. Is that correct about people having no clear idea about what to do?
Look, the situation right now seems as bleak as it's ever been, and it might be tempting to throw up our hands and say, look, these are intractable conflicts, and we should not get involved, and we should give up on the idea of a two-state solution, give up on the idea of a political solution in the Middle East. But I think that would be the wrong approach. I think we have to continue to fight for de-escalation, dialogue, diplomacy. There is no other alternative here, and all the other alternatives are worse. We have to have a political solution, and this in the end is the problem with Israel's strategy. Israel could be victorious on the battlefield. Look, they've crushed Hamas, they've crushed Hezbollah largely. They could do some severe damage to Iran, but in the end they could lose politically by not having a plan for the day after. And if you think that just taking out the leadership of Hezbollah, of crushing Hamas on the battlefield, if you think that's going to solve the problems, it's simply not going to happen. There will be a regrowth. There will be new leaders that will take the place of the leadership, and there will be new fighters. And with 42,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza, many of whom are civilians, many of whom are children. There will be a huge wave of resentment. There'll be a new generation of resentment and hatred for Israel to come out of this in both Gaza and in Lebanon, and probably Iran as well. For all the differences that Iranians have with their leadership, I can think of no better way to increase solidarity with the leadership than for Israel to start attacking Iran directly. So I think Benjamin Netanyahu's in fantasy land to some extent when he dreams of this full-scale regime change and what he could do, the damage he could do to Iran directly. But that's the moment we seem to be in at the moment.
Yeah, and the history of the area supports your argument, it would seem. Crucially here, I just want to mention this before we go, the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak says it's too late to significantly set back Tehran's nuclear ambitions. And he's actually thinking that a massive attack on the oil facilities is likely. What situation do we have in the Middle East now if Iran, according to a report I saw on The Guardian, I think, could now produce a nuclear bomb if pressed within weeks or months, thanks to its rapid advances in uranium enrichment? That sounds frightening too, doesn't it?
It is frightening, and the Iranian nuclear program is a real thing. It's a real threat. I think the timescale is a bit longer than often is we made out to believe. I mean, the weeks refers to the actual material, but actually creating the bomb will be a lot harder. So I think we're probably still in months, even years away from that. But Benjamin Netanyahu's argument is very much this will change the balance of power in the Middle East. We have to stop Iran getting the bomb. I think in the end we need a political solution. And I think when it comes to New Zealand's role, I think there's plenty more that New Zealand could do in a small way. New Zealand has been very good at putting out statements over the past year and taking votes at the United Nations. I think now really is the time for New Zealand's Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, to become a bit more active, to travel to the Middle East. He spent only a very, very brief moment in the Middle East since he became Foreign Minister. I think there's a real chance for him to travel now to the region, not to the war zone itself, but to the likes of the Gulf states, to New Zealand's friends and partners in the region, and to learn the views of those on the ground and see what more New Zealand could do when it comes to these political solutions, because certainly there's room for New Zealand's involvement when it comes to some of these talks on de-escalation, dialogue, diplomacy. There are plenty of tried now, Qatar, for example, Egypt. New Zealand could certainly work in with the likes of those states and others like the UAE, where New Zealand signed a trade deal just a couple of weeks ago. New Zealand has very good relations with Abu Dhabi. So I think there's plenty more that New Zealand could do. And I think while the situation looks as bleak as ever in the Middle East, we have to be optimistic and we have to continue to look for a solution, because the alternative is so much worse.
Indeed. Thank you, Geoffrey. Geoffrey Miller with us